Sergeant Olivia Liv Hawkins gripped the handrail tightly as the medical frigate Hippocrates Hope shuddered its way out of hyperspace. Turbulence was a constant on these medical mercy missions to the far-flung frontiers of Allied space, but that didn't make it any more pleasant, especially not on a mixed-species vessel never quite designed for Earth-standard gravity. Liv was used to it, though. As the only human aboard, she'd adapted quickly to the peculiarities of life among a crew of aliens. Her crewmates likewise had adapted to her, their initial trepidation at having the Deathworlder in their midst slowly giving way to a mix of fascination and professional respect. Sergeant Hawkins to the bridge. The insectoid click of Captain Zilith's voice over the comms snapped Liv out of her musings. Distress call from the Kepler 1138 mining outpost. All medical personnel report for mission briefing. Here we go again, Liv thought wryly, double-timing it to the briefing room. Just another day in the interstellar ER. The scene on the bridge was carefully controlled chaos, each species' crisis protocols melding into a discordant but well-practiced harmony. Captain Zilith stood central, her chitinous appendages manipulating holodisplays alive with vital information. "What do we got, Cap?" Liv asked, sliding into her usual spot between Trilks, the hulking reptilian Zorgex trauma surgeon, and Calreen, the Lith-Bixian critical care specialist. An odd pairing of physiologies, but an effective one. A microcosm of the whole crazy ship. "Industrial accident," Zilith replied, her mandibles clacking rapid fire. "Tunnel collapse in the xenon mines. Dozens of miners still trapped below levels with full atmospheric breach. Toxicity rising." Liv winced. Xenon mines were already a medical nightmare when everything was working properly. A collapse with a breach would be, well, there was a reason they were getting this call. "Any human miners?" she asked, already calculating contingencies. Not every species had the same tolerances as Earth-adapted biology. If there were humans down there, the exposure level could already be tragically past time critical for the others. Zilith shook her head. "Negative. Kepler 1138 is a joint Tal-Vakrian venture. Kratal majority, with Cerulean and Varaxian laborers." Good, Liv thought grimly. Kratal were sturdy, but no one was leave them in hard vacuum for a while, sturdy like Terrans could be when the chips were down. Trilks rumbled a concerned note deep in his barrel chest. "Varaxians, crystalline biology will not interact well with xenon gas." His saurian eyes met Liv's, a shared moment of perfect, terrible understanding between field medics. Liv nodded, mouth set in a grim line. The bell had been rung. Time to get to work. "Hawkins, Trilks, Calreen, suit up and meet in Shuttle Bay 2 and 5. Zilith ordered. "The recon team says we have a stable point of entry near the secondary refinery shaft. You'll be the tip of the spear on this one." "Understood," Liv replied, already unbuckling her restraints. She met Trilks, and Calreen's eyes one last time, seeing the same steely dedication beneath their alien features. No matter how many worlds they each called home, this was the job. "Let's go get our miners." The scene that greeted Liv and her team as they touched down at the mining site was one of barely controlled pandemonium. Mining construct bots and emergency vehicles swarmed the area, their sirens and spotlights painting the grim landscape in a dizzying light show straight out of a nightmare. At the center of it all gaped the dark maw of the collapsed mine tunnel, ominous and foreboding. Redouts flickered on Liv's HUD as her suit's sensors analyzed the invisible miasma leaking up from that abyss, the deadly xenon gas that the miners were even now choking on deep below. "Trilks, Calreen, what's your read on those toxicity levels?" Liv asked as they hustled towards the emergency command post. The inscrutable alien numbers meant little to her Earth-trained eyes, but she trusted her team's assessments implicitly. A troubled rumble from Trilks was not the response she'd been hoping for. "Most concerning. We must work quickly. Kratal resilient, but prolonged exposure in enclosed space." He trailed off, the implication hanging heavy in the fetid air. Calrine's stealth form was taut as a coiled spring, her movements sharp and precise as she double-checked her medkit. Agreed. The Varaxians in particular. Their crystalline forms will begin to destabilize rapidly if contamination spreads internally. We may be looking at systemic integrity failures. In other words, Liv translated grimly, they might literally shatter like dropped vases if we don't get them out of there. And the pathogenic xenon gas. ASAP. Fan-freaking-tastic. The being in charge of the rescue operation was a grizzled old Tal, his exoskeleton pockmarked with the scars of 1,000 industrial accidents. Liv recognized the look in his compound eyes, though. The same haunted urgency she saw in the mirror after every mission gone south. He began clicking and chirping rapid fire as soon as they approached, Liv's suit auto-translating a beat later. 6 teams of 5 still unaccounted for. Last known positions put them near the central junction before the tunnel gave way. My crews are trying to shore up the main passage, but it's slow going. What about environmental controls? Trilks asked, poring over schematics on his gauntlet display. If we can vent the xenon and pump in breathable atmo. The Tal shook his head, mandibles tight with tension. Systems already redlined trying to keep the whole mine from going poisonous. And with the breach, he waved a claw helplessly at the collapsed tunnel. It's fighting a losing battle. That's why I requested an emergency medical team. Liv nodded, already running the odds in her head. The Tal was right. They were out of time and options for anything resembling a conventional rescue. But then, that's why the Hippocrates Hope had said its best. Unconventional was their specialty. She pulled up her own holo display, the alien mind map now overlaid with human-friendly context from her suit's battle management eye. There, she said, pointing to a smaller side tunnel snaking away from the main passage, a secondary maintenance shaft. Looks like it connects to the central hub through a series of ventilation ducts. Trilks peered over her shoulder, a low hiss escaping his scaly lips. A difficult route. Narrow. Unstable. But he met her gaze, ancient reptilian eyes reflecting her own grim determination. Perhaps our only option. The Tyran is right, Calrine chimed in, her voice pragmatic as ever. We can move faster than the mining bots. Reach the trapped miners before. She didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew what was at stake. The tall commander looked between the 3 of them, compound eyes glittering with a spark of desperate hope. You're sure you can make it through? The risk is what we signed up for. Liv finished for him, straightening her shoulders beneath her combat medic rig. This is what we do. She turned to her team. These aliens who had become closer than blood through the trials of Trage. Trilks, Calrine, you with me. The Zorgax bared his fangs in a fierce grin. To the halls of the life-givers or the void beyond. Calrine simply unslung her medkit and nodded, gaze steely. Let's go save some lives, Sergeant Hawkins. With a last salute to the tall commander, Liv unholstered her plasma cutter and strode towards the waiting abyss of the mine shaft. Just another day in the interstellar ER. Time to get to work. The first thing that hit Liv as they descended into the bowels of the mine was the smell. Even through her suit's air filters, the acrid tang of xenon gas was unmistakable. Down here, it clung to everything like a malevolent fog, as if the very air was rejecting their intrusion. Trilks, give me a read on the toxicity, Liv ordered, eyeing her own suit's ominously spiking gauges. The big Zorgax rumbled an affirmative, his taloned hands dancing across his gauntlet interface. Levels climbing steadily as we descend, he reported grimly, approaching critical thresholds for Kratal physiology. Varaxian tolerance, significantly lower. Liv cursed under her breath. They were running out of time. Double time it. People. Calrine, keep an eye on R6. This xenon miasma will play hell with our sensory equipment. The Bixian nodded sharply, unslinging her pulse rifle with smooth, economical movements. In these close confines, the weapon's stun pulses would be just as effective as its lethal mode. and far less likely to cause a catastrophic secondary collapse. They moved quickly and quietly through the labyrinthian maintenance tunnels, the only sounds the hiss of their rebreathers and the muffled clang of their mag boots on the metal grating. Liv took point, her eyes flicking constantly between her motion tracker and the hazy green glow of the tunnel ahead illuminated by her suit lamps. Something felt off about this place, beyond just the choking gas and the looming specter of death. Liv's skin crawled with a primitive unease, the kind of deep-seated wrongness that had saved her life more times than she could count in the xenobiology-haunted battlefields of the frontier wars. She held up a fist, bringing their advance to a halt. "Hold up. Trilks, you feel that?" The Zorgax tilted his head, tongue flicking out to taste the fetid air like a serpent scenting prey. His eyes widened. Yes, a vibration. Not the tunnel settling. Something else. Organic. Calorine stepped up to Liv's other side, her rifle muzzle tracking the shadows. The miners. "Let's hope so," Liv muttered. Then, louder, "This is Sergeant Olivia Hawkins of the Hippocrates Hope. Any Kepler 1138 personnel, sound off." For a long, heart-stopping moment, there was nothing but the hiss of the gas and the drumbeat of Liv's own pulse in her ears. Then, a sound. A scrape of something hard on metal. Then another, growing louder, more frequent, coming from the branching tunnel just ahead. Trilks pivoted to face the noise, his massive frame poised to shield his smaller comrades. Calorine's rifle muzzle never wavered. Liv took a step forward, one hand raised in the universal gesture of peaceful approach. "We're here to help. Medical assistance from the Hippocrates Hope. Do you need?" Her words died in her throat as a figure staggered into the sickly light. It was a Kratal miner, his chitinous exoskeleton recognizable, even under the coating of dust and viscous green fluid. But there was something horribly wrong. The miner's left arm and half his thorax were warped, twisted into a mass of pulsating green-black tendrils that writhed and coiled with a nightmarish sentience. One compound eye had ruptured, leaking more of the fluid, while the other stared ahead with a milky, unseeing gaze. "What in the name of the void?" Calorine breathed, her rifle muzzle dipping in shock. Trilks's hiss reverberated through the confined space like a razor blade on glass. "The xenon gas," the Zorgax rasped. It's not just toxic, it's mutagenic." As if waiting for those words, more figures began to lurch into view behind the first. Kratal, Ceruleans, Phyraxians, all in various states of the same grotesque metamorphosis. Their movements were jerky, uncoordinated, as if the foreign biomass was puppeting them like marionettes. Trilks. Calorine. Liv's voice was flat, the icy calm of crisis mode descending over her like a mantle. "Get the scanner packages prepped for wide-spectrum sampling. Document everything." Her hands never shook as she unholstered her plasma cutter. The distinctive whine as it charged was like the scream of a lost soul in the miasmic murk. "And if those things make a move on us," the ominous click as she flicked the safety off echoed like a death knell. "Then we do what we have to do." Just another day in the interstellar ER, but by the spirits of her Terran ancestors, this was shaping up to be one hell of a shift. The twisted forms of the mutated miners lurched forward, their movements a jerky, uncoordinated nightmare. Liv's grip tightened on her plasma cutter, the weapon's charge whining higher. "Hold your fire," she barked, her voice cracking like a whip in the fetid air. "They're not hostile. Not yet." Trilks's reptilian eyes flicked to her, incredulous. "They're barely sapient anymore, Sergeant Hawkins, whatever that gas has done to them. They're still our patients." Liv shot back, steel in her voice. "We're here to help them, not put them down like rabid dogs." Calorine's rifle never wavered, but her stance loosened slightly. "What's the plan then, Sergeant?" Liv's mind raced, scenarios and probabilities whirling like fragments in a cyclone. Standard quarantine procedures were worse than useless here. They'd never get the miners back to the ship in time, even if they could subdue them without catastrophic injury. But maybe. Trialx. The xenon gas. You said it's mutagenic, not just toxic. How is it interacting with their biology? What's the vector? The Zorgax blinked, his massive intellect shifting gears. Absorption through respiration, certainly. But also, direct cellular contact. The fluid secretions. They're not just byproducts. They're the mutagen vector. Liv nodded grimly, the pieces falling into place. It's spreading itself, evolving to infect new hosts. Her gaze locked with Trilx's. Can you synthesize a counteragent? Something to neutralize the mutagen on contact. The Zorgax was already reaching for his medkit, taloned hands a blur. Possible. We'll need samples. Live tissue. Risky. I'll get your samples, Liv said, holstering her plasma cutter and unsheathing her combat knife. The smart steel flickered with a deadly UV sheen. Calorine, cover me. Before her team could protest, Liv was moving, every muscle primed with Terran speed and strength. She wove between the lurching miners, their mutated limbs grasping clumsily at her passing form. Her objective was the Varaxian at the rear of the pack, its crystalline carapace cracked and oozing with the same mutagen fluid. A whirling slash of her knife, and a shard of the infected crystal was tumbling into her gloved hand. But even as she pirouetted away, Liv saw the Varaxian's form shudder, the cracks in its shell spreading with a sickening crunch. It was literally coming apart, its structural integrity failing as the mutagen warped it from within. It's destabilizing. Calorine shouted, her rifle barking as a mutated Kratal lashed out at Liv with a twisted claw. The plasma bolt seared the reaching limb to molten slag, but more miners were closing in, drawn by the commotion. We have to fall back. No. Liv's shout was pure defiance as she lunged back towards the stricken Varaxian. We can still save it. Trilx's warning hiss was drowned out by the blood pounding in Liv's ears as she skidded to her knees beside the fallen miner. Up close, she could see the web of fractures spreading across his body, the mutagen seeping from every crack like some obscene sap. The Varaxian's remaining mandibles clicked weakly, a piteous sound that tore at Liv's heart. It was still in there, still alive and suffering. She couldn't abandon it to this fate. She wouldn't. Sergeant Hawkins. Calorine's voice crackled over the comm, laced with static from the mutagen's interference. The counteragent. Trilx needs that sample now or we'll lose the whole group. Liv's hand clenched around the shard of infected crystal, reality reasserting itself. The mission. The miners. Her team. That was what mattered. With a wordless snarl, she slapped the shard into Trilx's waiting palm and spun back towards the fallen Varaxian. Instinct guided her actions as she sheathed her knife and planted her hands on either side of the worst crack bisecting the miner's torso. Hold on, she gritted out, feeling the oozing fluid seeping into her gloves, the tingle of the mutagen already numbing her fingers. This is probably going to hurt. And then, with a convulsive heave, she pushed, channeling every ounce of her gene-modded Terran strength into holding the Varaxian's fracturing body together. Pain. Searing, blinding, all-consuming. It ripped through Liv like a solar flare, every nerve ending shrieking in agony as the mutagen seeped through her gloves and into her skin. She could feel it warming into her cells, trying to rewrite the very code of her being. But beneath the pain, beneath the invasion, something else stirred, something ancient and defiant, written into her genes by eons of unforgiving Terran evolution. The iron will that had enabled her species to claw its way from the muck and reach for the stars. Liv's lips peeled back from her teeth in a feral grin, a rictus of pure human stubbornness. Her hands clenched tighter, fingers digging into the Varaxian's fractured hide. Not today, she growled through gritted teeth. You don't get this one. Dimly, as if from a great distance, she heard Trilx's hiss of shock, Calorine's gasp of disbelief. She felt the tingle of the Zorgax's scanner playing over her hunched form. analyzing, quantifying the impossibility unfolding before them. But all that mattered was the Varaxian beneath her hands and the insidious force trying to tear it apart. Liv poured everything she had into that touch, every ounce of willpower and defiance. Her veins pulsed with golden fire, her muscles surged with a strength beyond mere flesh. And incredibly, impossibly, it began to work. The spread of the cracks slowed, halted. The oozing mutagen hissed and steamed as it met some invisible resistance. Slowly, painfully, the ragged edges of the Varaxian's wounds began to knit back together, sealing shut like a time-lapse of healing. Great Mother of Mercy! Trilks breathed, his scanner forgotten in his talon grip. Sergeant Hawkins, what are you? Liv didn't answer, couldn't answer. Her world had narrowed to the being beneath her hands, and the implacable will flowing through her. She was a conduit, a channel for something vaster than herself, something that looked upon the mutagen's insidious taint and snarled in defiance. With a final pulse of that impossible golden energy, the last crack in the Varaxian's carapace sealed shut. The oily sheen of the mutagen evaporated like mist beneath the rising sun, leaving only the smooth, faceted surface of healthy crystal. Slowly, agonizingly, Liv sat back on her heels. Her hands were numb, her gloves seared and blackened. Her head swam with exhaustion. Her heart hammered a staccato beat of exertion and adrenaline. But the Varaxian was whole, alive. A taloned hand gripped her shoulder, steadying her. Trilks. The Zorgax's eyes were wide, his saurian features slack with awe. Sergeant, I have never seen, in all my years, the counteragent. Calrine's shout snapped them both back to the present. The Bixian was crouched over the fallen form of a Crotal miner, her hands a blur as she loaded Trilks's hastily synthesized cure into her hypospray. It's working. The mutagen is receding. Liv struggled to her feet, swaying but determined. Her job wasn't done. Not while there were still lives to save. She looked down at her hands, still thrumming with that fading golden warmth. The pain was a distant memory, drowned out by a rising tide of fierce, protective love for these beings, this place that had become more than just another mission. Her fingers curled into fists, human skin against alien steel. She was Sergeant Olivia Hawkins of the Hippocrates Hope. She was a combat medic, a healer, a guardian. She was Terran, a child of Earth, a Deathworlder born. And she had a job to do. With a resolute nod to her team, ignoring their looks of concern and amazement, Liv strode towards the remaining miners, hypospray in hand and determination in her heart. Just another day in the interstellar ER, but by all the spirits of her ancient homeworld, what a day it had become.